For the first 15 to 20 seconds, Marissa is the only one in the scene, forcing all of the power into her possession. Just as Marissa enters alley, we see her on the right side, taking up a good portion of the frame. Erik is roughly centered and very small. As the scene progresses, the camera zooms in on Marissa and she gets larger and larger, showing more and more power. At 21 seconds, the camera zooms past Marissa and the focus changes to Erik. Now the camera rapidly zooms in on Erik, his figure becoming larger with every passing second. At 28 seconds, the camera becomes motionless and Erik looks up. Erik's upward directed eye line shows that Marissa still has some power in the scene, though it is leaving her rapidly. Erik stands up, pointing his gun at Marissa, his two friends joining him. This moment is when power shifts from Marissa to Erik. Marissa freezes, shocked, drawing in a deep breath, dropping her phone. She takes a step back, becoming smaller and smaller in the frame, losing more and more power. Erik now fills the frame to the point that the top of his head is cropped. He now has all of the power in the scene. At this point, Marissa is looking up at Erik, her eyeline showing that Erik possesses the power. Now we're going to move on to environment. Marissa steps into a tight hallway, giving a claustrophobic feeling. This foreshadows the events to come. She then steps into an open street, giving her a feeling of freedom and of power. Later in the scene, she is led into a tight alleyway, where Erik is held at gunpoint. The farther in she goes, the smaller the alley gets, entrapping her more and more. The moment she is in the tightest part of the alley is when power shifts from Marissa to Erik, where she becomes the one held at gunpoint. Now, rule of thirds. Marissa steps into the hallway, roughly centered and a little towards the left third of the screen. Seeing her from behind, she is firmly on the left third line. Once outside we see her from the side, she is on the right third line. As she comes to a stop, she moves to the left third line. When she runs again, she returns to the right third line. Each time she moves from line to line, there are light fixtures in the background to balance her from the opposite third. Her eyes remain on the top third line. Seen from behind, she is running in the left third of the frame, a car in the same spot on the right third. This balances the shot. She sprints to the alley, remaining on the left third, the shot balanced by cars. Entering the alley, she is focused center frame, and this tells us how important she is in the shot, having all the power. Her eyes are directly on the top third line. We now see her from behind, Erik now centered yet small, and Marissa on the right third line, a doorway balancing Marissa from the left third line. When the view switches to her front, she remains on the right third line, the frame leaving room in front of her in the direction she is running. Her face remains on the top third line. The camera now zooms on Erik, center frame, showing the beginning of the power transition. Erik looks up at Marissa, his eyes resting directly on the top third line. Erik stands up, now on the left third line, Marissa centered yet smaller. Erik's face is placed where the left third line and top third line intersect. Switching to a front view of Marissa, she is placed on the right third line, her eyes on the top third line. Now seeing a front view of Erik, he is centered and large, filling the frame, his eyes roughly placed on the top third line. Looking from behind Erik, Marissa is on the right third line, the bulk of Erik's body filling the left third. Erik's gun is centered in the top third, showing its power and importance in the shot, and Marissa's eyes are located at the intersection of the top third and right third lines. Moving on to colors, we first see Marissa in a lighter, warm-colored hallway, contrasting strongly with her black pants and coat. She then moves outside into a much lighter, cooler background. The only thing in focus here is Marissa, firmly separating her dark figure from the light background. Now Marissa is sprinting, the background a somewhat dark wall. Instead of using light and color to separate her from the background and foreground, apparent motion is used. The camera moves with her, the background and foreground elements moving faster than her. This motion, combined with a fixed focus, serves to easily separate her from the background and foreground in the low contrast shot. Next, Marissa is running into the alley, a light background separating her, along with focus and apparent motion. When we first see Erik at gunpoint, he is in the midground, slightly out of focus. Marissa is in the foreground, only contrasted against the black walls by apparent motion and focus. It is likely that a long lens was used here, as the time for Marissa to run to Erik was long when compared to the apparent distance. The long lens serves to pull the foreground, midground, and background together. This makes the three figures in the midground more apparent in the scene, rather than a small blip barely visible. The foreground is a dark gray, the midground even darker, hidden in shadow, and the background is a contrasting light color. At 20 seconds, we can see the focus of the camera shift from Marissa to Erik, Marissa suddenly becoming blurry and Erik falling into sharpness. As Marissa pulls out her phone, Her left side is easily contrasted by color, but her right side is against the dark wall and is contrasted by her moving her arm to grab her phone. As we zoom in on Erik, his face and body are near silhouette, contrasted by a bright background. After Erik stands up, it cuts to Marissa, her left side still contrasted by a bright background, her right side dropping her phone using apparent motion to separate her from the background elements. Along with a tight aperture, anything just behind her is out of focus, serving to further highlight her feeling of claustrophobia. Cutting back to Erik, he is holding a gun in Marissa's face. His right hand and gun reflect light, making them pop against the dark background of his chest. His right arm is dark, near black, popping out against the light streak. He moves slightly, serving to further remove him from the background. His face is lit, but not overly lit, just enough to separate him. Now we see a portion of Erik's figure covering up Marissa. Marissa is lit fairly, separating her face from her dark hair. Her dark hair separates her from the light streak and wall, along with her dark coat. Erik's dark arm separates him from Marissa in the midground, contrasting against her well-lit torso. Marissa is the focus in the scene. Erik being out of focus serves to make him seem even more imposing, because when something is extremely close to our eyes, it is out of focus, therefore extremely large and intimidating. Moving to lighting, in this initial hall scene, there is light on Marissa from behind and above. The lights above come down at an angle. As she passes under each one, her face falls into shadow. As she comes outside, light comes from above but also bounces off the light walls, lighting her from above and below. As Marissa sprints, the dark wall behind her casts little light. The sidewalk below her reflects some, but most of the light comes from directly behind her and directly in front of her. Her dark coat reflects little to no light coming from behind her, only noticeable in her hair. This results in a shadow on the side of her face facing the camera, the front of her face showing bright and determined. Also, she is sprinting in 3 to 4 inch heels. As she turns into the alley, the majority of the light in the scene comes from behind her. The truck to her right blocks any direct sunlight from above. The shadow that she runs into cleverly casts her with even lighting. Notice the cut as soon as she steps out of the shadow. Marissa runs toward Erik, the primary source of light coming from the wall to her left, reflecting soft sunlight onto her left side. Erik is under an arch, the only light coming from behind him, casting him in a dark shadow. Erik remains in shadow as he stands up. Cutting to Marissa, she is now in dark shadow similar to Erik. Cutting back to Erik, he is in the same dark shadow as before, but then steps forward, casting more light onto his face, his sweat reflecting it. Now we see both Erik and Marissa in frame. Marissa steps back, giving her extra light. She also raises her head to look at Erik, getting even more light on her face. This extra light serves to further separate her from the foreground and background. Erik, still under the arch, makes him darker, contrasting against the more lit Marissa, removing him from the midground along with the use of focus. Light from behind Marissa comes in and lights Erik's chest, making him pop against the dark wall in the background. Now, framing. We initially see Marissa in the narrow hallway with tiled floors. The lines where the walls meet the floor and ceiling all point toward Marissa. The lines between the tiles point toward Marissa as well. Next, Marissa comes outside. The lines on the wall in front of her point to Marissa as well as the lines on the left wall behind her. Just before she starts her sprint, there are lines along the wall pointing to her. After the sprint, there is a pole behind Marissa leading the eyes vertically. The bottom of the truck leads to Marissa. The right wall helps to direct the eye as well as the graffitied wall in the background. There are multiple lines leading to the focus of this shot, Erik. In the upper right, there are pipes leading to him. On the bottom left, there is the edge of the wall meeting the ground, and Marissa is looking toward him, strongly emphasizing where we should look. Additionally, the 2 officers holding him at gunpoint, their arms point toward him, giving the final direction our eyes need and want. Seeing Erik up close, there are pillars on the right and left walls in the background, leading to the subject. There is a gutter catching our attention, drawing us down and to the center. The 2 guns point straight toward Erik. There are a few horizontal cracks in the pavement also leading to Erik. Now we see 3 guns pointed at Marissa, clearly telling us where to look. There are some pipes on the right leading straight to her. Seeing only Marissa's face, there is a blurry white pipe or ledge leading to Marissa. There is a dark gutter leading vertically to her. Erik has a gun reflecting light, creating a line leading to his face. There are numerous pipes, pillars, and cracks leading to him. In the final shot, Erik's arm leads to Marissa's face, the wall-ground edge leads up to Marissa. The visual story. From a purely visual standpoint, we see a woman that appears to be some form of law enforcement looking panicked. Her lack of looking back shows that she is clearly chasing something or someone. A Upon approaching two officers holding a man at gunpoint, she shows compliance by holding up her gun and then holstering it, also showing a badge. In a show of confidence, she removes her attention from the man and pulls out her phone, looking down. It's at this moment the man stands up, pointing a gun at her, the officers doing the same. Her shock is shown by her open mouth, her taking a step back, and her dropping the phone. He appears to know her, shown by his apparent anger, the sweat on his face, and the tension in his posture. And she appears to know him, showing it by looking directly into his eyes. The Audible story.
Polizei, bleiben Sie sofort stehen!
Bleib los, hast du mich verstanden?
Yes, she'll get sick! Im Griff! Bleiben Sie zurück!
United States Federal Enforcement! This man is under my warrant. I'm taking over this arrest.
Kein Schritt weiter!
Footsteps are heard, echoing. There are sirens, but they are muddled, giving an impression of being lost or confused. There is yelling, gradually getting louder. The pace of the footsteps increases slightly. Faint music begins to swell. A woman yells in a different language and then switches to English. Her voice becomes somewhat bored, more comfortable by the end of her sentence. The music swells to a climax and then goes silent. After a few moments of silence, a muffled, deep exhale is heard. A note on flashbacks. Flashbacks in Hanna tend to follow a structure. The character experiencing the flashback is usually standing still, the lighting in the current time is cool, the audio suddenly becomes muffled. Time will usually slow somewhat. In the flashback, the lighting will be warmer, the audio slightly muffled, at least in the beginning. In some cases, the current time and flashback audio will overlap either during the beginning, end, or throughout. Errors. At 30 seconds, both of Marissa's arms are down when we view her from behind. When we cut to a front view, her right arm is up, her phone to her ear. Also, can we acknowledge the fact that Erik has a full foot on Marissa? A 6'2" to 5'2"? This guy is huge, he looks like a giant in this chair. It's extremely easy to tell who has the power in this picture.